Hey guys, welcome back into another episode of Beneath the Grandstand, episode 22. Believe it. Thanks for joining us in this journey. If you haven't yet, please tell your friends about it. Please, and share it out. Today's guest, I think, is gonna be someone you chat about. It's gonna create a ton of chatter and a little engagement. Something you're gonna want to pull apart on your next long run. But before we dive into our guest today, I do need to acknowledge I am without my wingman, my co-pilot from back in the day, and hopefully moving forward forever. Ryan Fenton is not with us today because, for a joyous reason, the man is getting married, and we are so happy for them and him and Jess. And I think we are so joyous to see them finally be able to celebrate their love and maybe a different experience than they were hoping originally, but it's still happening. Ryan's getting married this weekend, guys. So please reach out to him. Tell him congratulations and nothing but love for him. I wish I could be down there with him, but I promise you, the celebration I am missing this weekend, I will make up for the next time we are on site at an event. So much love to the main man, Ryan Fenton. But with that, I am so ecstatic to dive into today's guest. I think you guys, we go a lot of different directions, all of which places I think our audience is really going to appreciate. Today, our guest is the co-founder of Strava, Mark Gainey. So, guys, we go across the gamut here. We talk about literally just the daily athlete experience on Strava. We talk about corporate ethics when it comes to data. And we even get into, what is that kind of main frustration that the man on the street will walk up to Mark and complain about. So, we dive into a lot of things, and I think we run the gamut of ethics, technology, and then, day-to-day execution of what wearable fitness and all these devices are going to mean to our daily experience and our sport moving forward. So very humbled for his time and the Strava team's time. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it into our conversation with Mark Gainey. All right, we're dropping in here for the conversation with Mark. And Mark, I want to set the stage and give you some credence and grounding as an athlete yourself. So our audience has some context. What is your current Strava feed look like? What's the last activity, and maybe who is the person that you can reliably expect to give you first kudos once you upload?
It's rather ironic that you're asking this question on this day. There's good news and bad news. The good news is I actually have an upload on Strava today. It's the first one in about 3.5 weeks. I had a surgery. I had a surgery on my arm about 3.5 weeks ago that has totally blown up my active lifestyle. But I did get out today. One of my two boys, I got twin boys, and Jake, he drugged me out. We put 5K out on some country roads here near my house. Just slow and steady, just letting the legs kind of feel what it looked like to move again and get the arm moving again. And that was, tell you what, it was a great morning. To be able to do that, it just sets up the rest of the day. But the feed's been a little empty, I got to admit, for the last month. It's been rough. It's a bit like being in jail, watching all your friends. And yeah, I better hope that my other son was the first person to kudo me. Put to that thing.
I know there are a lot of people who can attest to this feeling right now. I think, having the motivation to get out there is half the battle when it comes to those injuries.
Yeah, no, we all know it is part of the journey. You're not going to avoid them, and what you do with the time while you're injured, and then I really appreciate it when you come out the other side.
Good stuff. So I think, you've graciously lent your kind of voice and mind to a numerous different podcasts, and I think some of us have heard the Strava origin story, and we can all appreciate that, and we kind of use it on a daily basis. But from a founder perspective, I would love to know about the moment when you hit upload. on the first day of Strava? Like, I would love to know, like, what did it actually look like on that first day when it went live, and like maybe walk us through that moment and what was like that first even activity that was uploaded.
Yeah, that's fun, Alex, because that's not something you get asked very often, and it's I've got some vivid memories. So, as many of you know, like the idea spans back to the prior century. I mean, Michael and I have wanted to do Strava since, gosh, 1995. But you're right, you got to fast forward about the summer of 2008. And we had this great gentleman. He's still with us today. His name is Davey Kitchell. I love to call him, the mad scientist of Strava. He really was the one who invented a lot of the technology behind Strava today. And he had created what we call the green machine. So you have to realize this is pre-mobile. Strava doesn't have a mobile app. It actually has a website that he had built, very basic. And it was the green, horrible green color that we had chosen prior to our lovely Strava orange that we have today. It had everything but the kitchen sink poured into it. There are still features probably on that first website that we still haven't gotten to actually commercializing today, 11 years later. But that first upload, the irony, because we started serving cyclists, I believe my first upload was a run, because that is what I am. I'm a runner much more so than I am a cyclist. And you're right. I can remember it vividly because the two things happen. One is it's amazing how you can retell the story, and the story can come to life just 2 minutes after you've worked out, to be able to sort of have this second experience, in some ways, enjoy the run a second time. And the other thing that was so much fun was how quickly it connected to other people. Even in those early days when we had just a few athletes on Strava, it took just a matter of seconds before, somebody was chiming in and saying, whether it was nice run or frankly, probably trash talking, probably giving me a hard time for my pace. But yeah, early days, hard website. You had to plug a Garmin into the back of your computer to actually upload any data. We asked a lot of the early athletes to even participate in Strava.
That's really interesting. You mentioned that you look back, you mentioned the whole kitchen sink, when you first went live. And I think that what an interesting art it is, for, I think, a lot of tech companies or new software platforms to learn, that, what is that balance between the kitchen sink and, user simplicity and user experience? Because I think I'd love to hear kind of like your balancing act and justification between the user experience today on Strava is extremely simple, right? It's just scroll, and it's relatively it's super, I guess, digestible. How do you balance that? Because I'm sure you could, you could hire somebody to make it look more sexy or more intricate, and like you could throw the kitchen sink at it. How do you balance that with just overall usability and experience?
Yeah, Alex, it's first up, I want to give you kudos for even telling us that it's simple, because I can tell you, if I put our head on right now, she would be the first to say to you, this is not simple. There are so many things that we make it so hard. For those who are familiar with segments on Strava, and it sounds like most of your listeners are, like, it takes 6 clicks to get into a segment, right? It's like, and so we look at the app very differently than you do. We look at it and we say, oh my goodness, there's so many areas of confusion, and it's feature rich. There's a lot of things that are hard to discover. So we'd actually make the counter argument that we've got a long ways to go at simplifying and streamlining. But I think, to answer your question, it's been part of the thought process from day one. And it starts with a really simple thesis, which is, if this is not fun and entertaining, it doesn't work. We're not out to necessarily make people faster or fitter or stronger. Those should be byproducts of an enjoying experience with your friends. And if the app can do that, then we've got a good start at things. And that's the thesis that we sort of start, or at least the philosophy. And then you're right. Then we had to, the second thing I'll tell you is, I talk about the kitchen sink and the green machine. Like I said, probably half of those features are even in Strava today. So we did have to pare it back and identify what's most important for our community today, and then think about a roadmap and imagine a future where, as the technology gets better, or people are more familiar with the app and are expecting more from us, we can begin to think about how we add that in.
So when you took a hard look at it and you talked about, what is most important for our community, and it seems like you're kind of working backwards from that, what is that kind of North Star? What is the ethos, and what is, I guess, at the core first, that you look in the lens that I guess you look at every decision through?
Yeah. So there's a couple. The one probably most basic premise is that we have the thesis that says people keep people active. That's, again, Michael and I started Strava because we really miss being on a team. He and I met on the crew team decades ago, and that experience really sort of defined what we then were missing when we graduated from college and wanted to have back, and to have that camaraderie and that esprit de corps and just that connection. So the first thing is Strava is very much a social platform for athletes. We want to figure out ways in which we bring your group together. We don't have to combine all 70 million of our athletes into one place, but if you've got a few friends that you want to connect with, how do we make that happen? That's always a fundamental premise. And then I think the other area that we've kind of appreciated is that I'll put it to you this way, there's three ways in which an athlete's always operating. They're either preparing for their next workout, they're in the middle of their workout, or they've finished and now they're kind of reliving their workout. And so what role does Strava play across those three avenues? Historically, we were always, after you've worked out, how can Strava surprise and delight you, right? What are the things that we can share about that workout that perhaps you didn't know? As we've grown and matured, we've gotten really excited about the things that we can do, for instance, before you work out, how you might discover routes or discover people to train with or discover events, things of that sort. But we had to grow into that. That's a perfect example of just with time, we've been able to expand the way in which we offer services to athletes.
I really appreciate you kind of grounding us in the kind of ethos and the kind of cornerstones of Strava here. And I think it's interesting you mentioned the before, during, and after kind of sequence. One question I had for you, and when we talk about that kind of ecosystem and that experience, right, of before, during, and after, one thing I've noticed is, and maybe this is, I feel like this is a common Strava consumer behavior, is that I am gathering my group for a run outside of Strava. I am experiencing the run on a device, right? That's still outside of Strava. I then upload, and then I push my content finally onto Strava, but then I'm going to talk about it on a completely different platform. So my ecosystem is like Slack, device, then Strava, then Twitter. And so I just wonder, I guess it has to be tempting to close the ecosystem. And I'm wondering, how do you kind of balance that between your consumer feedback and trying to close the loop?
Yeah. Boy, Alex, these are fun. You're in the middle of a lot of product planning going on at Strava these days. So I think there's again, maybe two platforms that we operate from, or two sort of pillars of strategy. One that's been critical to us from day one is an acknowledgement of how to be a great partner in the middle of this ecosystem. If you look today, I mean, we connect with, I don't know, well over 400 devices. We have 60,000 API developers. I mean, we've made a point of ensuring that we can be Switzerland, right? That we can work effectively with whatever products, whatever gear, whatever tracking devices that you feel is appropriate for your activity. We want to ensure that seamlessly integrates with Strava, and we'll continue down that path. So whether that's a device on your wrist, whether that's a power meter on your shoe, whether that's an indoor bike of some kind, we will never stop that. That's very important for us, because as athletes, there's so many different use cases and form and functionality that come from, particularly when you're working out. We feel it's critical to just cover the bases there. What you described in terms of your pre and post workout, we're really fascinated by this concept of how you organize and kind of collaborate and begin to sort of work together, whether that's to plan an event or to just go on a Saturday morning run. It's clear Strava should be in the middle of that and helping you do that more seamlessly. And I think the same thing on the back end. We're acutely aware of the fact that the ability for you to communicate effectively on Strava is definitely a 1.0 version. Right? You can make a comment on somebody's activity, But even my two, I mentioned earlier, I have twin boys that are 19 years old. You wouldn't believe how much grief I get from them from just a simple thing that, Dad, why can't we simply kudo and comment thread like in these things? Why can't I kudo a comment and rather than just an activity, right? I get it all the time from my teenage boys. So we really do think that there's a way in which we can improve that kind of the two bookends of your athletic experience inside Strava.
That's really interesting. You mentioned keeping all the APIs open and that balance. I think when we look at what was the kind of community fitness, what used to be the community fitness arms race that you guys ended up winning. When we look back at the challengers, right? There were brands who stepped in and tried to essentially close the ecosystem from like a product standpoint, whether it be the Nikes or the Under Armours doing Map My Fitness, Map My Run, Nike Run Club, things like that. There was a really strong competitiveness between those tech platforms, but you guys were able to kind of, it's hard to deny that you guys came out on top of that. And so I just wonder, like, how difficult was it to keep up the platform with these constantly, very varying APIs and new devices? And I guess like even now, well, we could bring it back to the present, like now more than ever, there are more devices, more platforms. There's Mirror, there's Hydro, there's Whoop, there's everything, there's Zwift, like you name it. There's more and more tech companies coming in, and there's a huge arms race. How does your team remain the aggregate and this open API that is somehow able to play nice with everyone?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, in some ways, you have to sort of appreciate just the different chapters that Strava's gone through. If you go back historically, we'll be the first to acknowledge it was hard. I mean, early on, we have, for instance, a great relationship with Garmin today. In fact, not only do we pull all their data in, but you can actually push Strava data out on the Garmin devices, right? You can do live segments and you can do Strava Beacon and so forth. So great relationship today. Did it start that way? No. I mean, it was challenging. I think that Michael and I often joke about sort of this notion of bloody knuckles. You can get pretty bloody knuckles knocking on somebody's door, asking for, is there a way we can work together? And it would get pretty bloody there. But I think what happened over time was that they realized, hey, we're not trying to create a competitive alternative. We love Garmin Connect, fabulous tool for what it's trying to do. We're the social platform. We're trying to connect an athlete's overall experience. And I think this is the critical thing, because the next chapter that you described was when we began to see the major footwear and apparel companies all begin investing heavily in digital, whether it was Nike doing their own thing, or as you suggested, Under Armour acquired Map My Fitness, ASICS acquired Runkeeper, Adidas acquired Run. I mean, you could just go down the list, right? Everybody was making acquisitions. The fascinating thing is when we would talk to our athletes, it's very rare, unless you're a professional athlete being sponsored, it's very rare that you connect with one brand. It's just, it's a LeBron James who's a Nike athlete, right? It's beyond that. I go out on a run this morning. I think I had a pair of Nikes on my feet. I'm wearing a pair of New Balance shorts. I've got some top from Lululemon or Rabbit or, it's like, right. We pull together because we're constantly sort of thinking about our experience and what we need in the moment. And that's just in one sport, right? You think about our athletes tend to do lots of different things. So when they're riding, they're investing in a whole other set of gear and technology. So once you recognize that, and we can be that independent sort of place where you can have your whole athletic life, that independent platform, that resonates really well with our community. And I think that the industry started to figure out, oh, what a great place for us to connect in, because now there's a really symbiotic relationship. So if you fast forward to today, there isn't a device that goes on the market that doesn't integrate with Strava as a start. As you just described, think about all the indoor fitness stuff, Hydro, Peloton, the Zwift. I mean, they launch a product and ensure that it connects into Strava, which it's a wonderful place to be. And we just want to ensure that they have a great experience because we see how important that is.
Yeah, well, congrats on your team for being on the other side of that, like, getting bloody knuckles and trying to, kind of being in a tough spot. And now you're on the other side. And I think, again, like this kind of brings us to the now. I want to move on to a moment where I think Ryan and I, from the flow sports perspective, kind of commiserate. Well, I don't know if it's commiserate, but we identify with maybe some of the challenges that might have arose, which was, earlier this spring. I think that you moved, and I think the quote was, "We're moving subscription to being at the core or the heart of our business." And I will tell you that, Ryan and I went through a really challenging moment when Flow decided to do the same. Essentially, we put things behind a paywall that used to be free, that people were accustomed with getting for free, and a entire community that based their daily kind of digital content and experience and what they were discussing on their runs every day, we put it behind a paywall. And there were some hurdles that we faced and a lot of pushback that we faced. But there was also a community on the cycling side for Flow Sports that was already on the subscription side. So we noticed a really clear difference between consumers. And I'm wondering what your team's experience has been with the biggest hurdle or learning you've had since putting things behind more things behind a subscription wall, and B, is there any insights between differences in sport or I guess yes segments of consumers?
Yeah, great questions, Alex. So you're right. We did. We've had subscription for years, but it was not something that we said as a company, this is the top priority and this is where we want to focus an entire organization's efforts. And that's what we did starting this year. When Michael and I stepped back into the organization last November, so coming up on a year ago, we had a heart-to-heart first internally with the company, not just our athletes, but the folks who dedicated their lives to working at Strava every day, and said, look, we know that this may feel risky, but here's the thinking. Number one, we have one customer. It's our athlete. And we really want to make sure they understand we are here to serve them. And we need to tie our business model to that premise. So let's have one business model. In fact, there's a great quote. I don't know if you've had a chance to see, there's a film out called The Social Dilemma. I love it because there's a quote at one point where they say, if you're not buying the product, you are the product. And we really wanted to avoid that in Strava. We don't want our athletes to become product here. This is from day one, Michael and I had a thesis that we want to build something that is so valuable to the athlete's experience and to their athletic life that it's as strategic as the shoes they put on to go for a run, or it's as strategic as the bike frame they decide to buy. So that's at our core. That's what we've always been about. And we just doubled down. And so you're right. We made some changes. Not only did we move a few features to paywall, but we brought in new routing features, new local legend features. In fact, I think in the first quarter alone, we made 53 improvements to the overall Strava experience, just really trying to signal to our athletes, this is our intention. This is how the experience is going to improve. To answer your question, so how has the response been? I'll give you two quick pieces of feedback. One, huge kudos to our community. We were worried. We were worried that there were people who would just say, forget it, we're not, you guys did the fast trick on us and the bait and switch, we're not in. That was not the response. There was some grumbling. We'll be the first to acknowledge it never feels good to maybe having something that you felt was free and now you're paying, but incredibly loyal, lots of support around what we were doing. And if you think about the things we moved, they're very unique to Strava and they're actually somewhat expensive. It had to do with segment leaderboards, matched runs, some things where there's a lot of processing power, and they are unique to Strava. You can't find them anywhere else in the world. So that was the thesis. Response was very good. I think your last question you were asking about in terms of segmentation, you have to think about our history. Again, we started very much down one specific sport. It was a go-to-market strategy. We picked cycling as our core sort of entry. And then over time, we expanded into running. And today now you can do, I think it's 34 different activities on Strava. So it's really just acknowledging that most of us love to go out and do different things, different times a year, or what goes on. But if you were to look at the subscription offering today, we'd be the first to acknowledge it's really strong for the cycling community. It's very good for running, and we see ways in which we can improve on that. And then as you start to think about that long tail of other sports, that's where we get excited about in the future. So from a segmentation perspective, it's a little more heavily weighted on our cycling community. And also, the last thing I'll add, we're finding in athletes, there's kind of this spectrum that any one athlete might be on during their life, but just depends where they are. And it's between sort of being very experiential in your athletic journey versus being very competitive. And it's not like you're always one or the other. It kind of shifts. Like I'll be the first to acknowledge, you come off of surgery, I'm all about experience right now. But that's the other place we're really trying to understand. We do very well on the Strava subscription side if you're at all competitive, if you like the leaderboards, if you want to go in. And so we're really excited about the things we can bring on the experiential side. And that has to do with actually things you were talking about earlier around just coordinating activities and doing things in small groups and so forth.
Yeah, because that's interesting. Because if you talk about Strava as a social platform, right? And I think one of the, I know Facebook themselves, they're kind of doubling down on Facebook groups, right? Being this kind of like arbiter of like where you are identifying and connecting with this community, right? So if that, if you look at Strava as the lens of like, okay, this is where I connect with, like you mentioned, like this is my tribe, right? And this is where we connect. I think people's just perception of Strava might change a little bit if they can see it as this kind of like arbiter of social gathering and social platform. And I think I'd actually I want to come back to, what putting things behind a paywall, like the actual benefit that the consumer's getting by putting things behind a paywall and what that kind of enables you guys to do. I'm going to come back to that at the end when we start talking about a little bit more about data. But I want to kind of keep us in the now first of, this spring you moved things a little bit to the subscription, more over to the subscription model. And then right after, at a similar time, we were amidst this kind of evolving kind of evolution of society, which is now more in this COVID lockdown. I would love to know, like, kind of like high level, what are some of the insights and kind of the audience insights that you are getting, and I guess like how has consumer behavior changed since COVID hit on Strava?
Yeah, it's been fascinating, right? I mean, what are just crazy 6 months is probably the world's worst understatement. Look, we're blessed. We'd be the first to acknowledge we were very fortunate to be in a position to offer a service that was meaningful in the time of a pandemic, and we can see that. We can see it in terms of people's commitment to fitness and wellness. Their ability, they had more time. They weren't commuting in their cars, and so perhaps they were able to just spend more time out, whether it was going for a walk or just putting in more miles on that bike. So from Strava's perspective, we actually saw a significant increase in people being active for the first time, joining Strava. We saw an increase in the rate of activity and just the time spent working out. All good things, right? We're, again, one of the primary theses we have as a company is that why bring joy to people's lives and why try to convince people to be active? Because if you're active, our thesis is a bunch of other great things happen, not just with your physical health, not just with your mental health. You end up being a better parent. You end up being a better partner. You end up being a better coworker. There's so much evidence out there that shows that if you're just willing to put in even 15, 20, 30 minutes a day, it's amazing sort of the downstream effect that has. And so we've been really pleased with the way in which people adopted Strava during this pandemic and have been super engaged in the platform. So that's one, just rates up. I think the other thing we saw is that for lack of being able to gather together physically, Strava ended up playing a really critical role around allowing people to come together. One simple example, our 5K challenge in, I think it was June, over 1 million people signed up for it. So you had 1 million people who were probably desperate for their local 5K on a Saturday. They didn't have it. And so Strava filled that void. Whether it's some of these virtual races that have taken place, the upcoming New York City Marathon, leveraging Strava to at least do something virtually. We've just seen a lot of creativity around ways in which people could foster competition and camaraderie in a virtual way.
Yeah, I'd love to dive into, I guess, Strava's role moving forward. Maybe not role, because that's a lot of responsibility. But I guess, with with all these virtual races and these virtual experiences, it's almost like a digitization and almost a gamification of exercise and endurance sports. What do you see the role of Strava in kind of this new experience of running and riding? It's like it's been gamified, and it's happening right now from a virtual sense, but I think we're probably going to evolve and keep some of the things that we're doing now are probably going to stick with us for a while. I guess, what is Strava's role in what we've seen as like the gamification and digitization of exercise moving forward? Are we pulling more metrics from, the way people run? Are we going to experience this are we going to see more metrics in a broadcast maybe of the Tour de France or like a New York City Marathon? Like, I guess, what do you see as Strava's role and I guess possibility in the future of competition?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to go back to something that you brought up earlier, just around sort of the importance of sort of simplicity in the experience and so forth. And so I might actually start my reaction to your question with, it's really important that we're playing a supporting role. It's technology should not be out in front and be kind of the story in and of itself. We've got a great stat that we actually track inside Strava, and it's the ratio of time working out to time in the app. And right now it's a 50-to-1 ratio. So for every 50 minutes you're working out, you're spending 1 minute in the app. And that ratio is actually increasing over time. So we're actually seeing people be more active. And a big part of our thesis is we should be somewhat, I don't want to say silent. What's the word I'm looking for? We should disappear in many ways when you're out enjoying that dawn that dawn run, or that again you've signed up to go do a 10K PR somewhere and so forth. We're in a supporting role to do that. So the first thing is, do I think that digital and software is going to play a really interesting role going forward? Absolutely. But I think it has to be done with the auspice of, we're there to support what we're trying to accomplish, which is, when people are active, good things happen, right? I'll keep coming back to that fundamental sort of first principle. So how does it show up going forward? Sky's the limit. I mean, I've been fascinated when you look at what people have been willing to do during this pandemic. I mean, we've got uploads of people who they've run ultra marathons in their backyard, right? They've done. I don't know if you're familiar with this Everesting phenomenon, because it's particularly popular amongst the cyclists, but this idea of just going out solo and basically climbing the equivalent of climbing Everest. So go out, find somewhere where you can go 29,000 feet. So they'll pick a hill that's 1,000 feet in elevation gain, and they'll do it 29 times as fast as they can. And then they compete on Strava. So once you post your Everesting record, it's like an FKT. It's a new PR, and then you have a whole bunch people around the world who are now trying to beat that. So there's just a really fun way in which we're allowing people, without having to be in the same place at the same time, to satisfy what motivates them. And I don't know if I'm answering your question, but what a great role for us as a digital platform to play, where we can remove the boundaries of geography, remove the boundaries of time, but allow people to kind of find their motivation, whatever it might be.
I think it's incredibly refreshing one. I think you are seeking the most simplistic footprint here, right? And I think to be not noticeable in this moment is something that I think is, maybe from, somebody who's on the advertising and marketing side of things. I think especially on the footwear, we are constantly seeking a new story to tell you about innovation, right? And we're seeking it so much that we're going to make it like super visible on the shoe. Like, it's visible tech, right? But like, how do we, like, is the consumer asking for that? Or do they want less of a touch? Do they want it do we want it like to be part of our lives that much? And I think it's interesting. We could look at the the way you are approaching, I guess, a consumer is what I'm saying is different than maybe some of the footwear companies or some of the other brands. And what I've also noticed is that consumers use Strava in a completely different way, I think, than other consumer behaviors. Just for an example, I'd say like if you sat in an advertising pitch right now, a keynote, a slide would come up and say, consumers want to protect their data more than ever, right? They are disabling cookies. They're using Alexa Gate. They want to get paid for their data, right? So we're in a position where we are pivoting and trying to hold things close to our chest and hide things away. However, when I go on Strava and my experience with Strava is people can't wait to pour more data and more information into Strava. It's a completely different consumer behavior. And I'm wondering, like, how is the brand able to achieve that? Because consumers trust Strava in a completely different plane than they trust any other digital experience in their life.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to hear you say that. I mean, it's paramount to our success. So, and I will give you two reasons why I think that is. The first is what we talked about earlier, which is this concept of we have one customer, and it is the athlete who's on Strava, and so we are there to serve them. The minute that we start selling ads on Strava, we have a conflict of interest. Now, does that mean we can't have sponsors? Does that mean we can't figure out ways in which brands can engage on Strava? If you do a challenge today, you'll often find probably the best challenges on Strava are ones that are sponsored and paid for by running brands, by shoe brands, and so forth. So there's a role to play inside Strava, but it's got to be very transparent, very clear, and frankly additive to the athlete experience. We think that challenges are better when Roka offers a great reward for you finishing a challenge or something like that. But we're very clear on this intent that our athlete is the customer, which is why the subscription is so important to us. It's like, we're going to build for you. We believe the contract we want to have with you over time is that the best Strava is the one that you're paying for every month. And you can be trusted in the fact that that's where we're going to stay focused. So that's one. The other piece of it is we put a tremendous amount of emphasis on this concept of privacy and safety inside Strava. It has been sort of the highest priority from the day we started. We sort of think about it a lot. And so examples, if you go today, you'll find not just a privacy policy in Strava, you'll see the privacy label where we try to make it super simple and intuitive in terms of what we do and don't do with data. Second thing we do, we make everything optional. So we try really hard. If you want to be completely private on Strava, use it as your personal training log. No problem. It's super easy. Do you have access to some of the features that are really fun? No. It's really hard to be on a segment leaderboard if you're going to be private. In fact, it's impossible. Although we've had members ask us for that. It's really funny. I want my stuff to be private, but I want to know how I'm doing on a leaderboard. It's like, that doesn't quite work. So I think that creating that optionality, creating basically choice for our athletes, making the privacy policies and so forth that we have very simple and intuitive to understand, and then just philosophically saying, look, you're our customer. That's who we want to build the long-term relationship with. Thus far, it's served us well, and we're hoping that we're still on the right path.
I'd love to stay on the kind of like consumer behavior chain right now. And, we chatted a little bit about some of the other connected devices that you work with. And I think right now, more than ever, we have new devices. We have more metrics than ever, right? And I think sometimes I wonder or I worry, I worry as a consumer, like, I think the data and metrics are interesting tools, but at some point, what is the signal and all this noise? Like, I guess from an industry perspective, where do we draw the line, and how do we balance giving people and creating more and more metrics, but also giving them the agency to understand what this means to their overall physical experience? And now we're tossing in things like glucose monitors and EKG monitor, even like more really intricate measures. I guess from an industry perspective and somebody who's on that side of this sector, where do we draw the line, and how do we balance metrics versus tangible, digestible info?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good. I mean, again, you're kind of in the middle of sort of many of the daily product discussions we're having internally at Strava, because you're right that the inbound of innovative data that's now being captured. You go back, you don't have to go back very long ago to realize, like, first thing you could capture is heart rate, right? Big old straps around your chest, and that was a big deal. And then it was GPS, right? But not GPS on a phone, just GPS if you had it on an arcane device like a Garmin cycling computer or watch, sort of suspect at best in terms of its quality and reliability. And now you fast forward to today. I mean, I can get heart rate 7 different ways till Sunday, right? I can get it through my ear, I can get it on my finger, I can get it on my wrist, and that's just heart rate. To your point, like, sleep, HRV, glucose, power outputs, the sky's the limit. I can just tell you from Strava's perspective, there's a couple of things. I'd say 3. One is, it's not about how much data you collect. It's what's most relevant to your experience. So we look for relevance. We'll often ingest more data into the Strava servers than we'll actually present to an athlete. So there's a relevance component. The second is, it's really not the data itself, it's the insight. What are we trying to share? What's the story you're trying to tell? It's much more interesting to understand sort of how this run related to a previous run and give you some insight into how you're doing than it is to actually give you the facts. And then the third piece for us is context, right? What I've learned, I always joke all the time that, like, single dad, twin boys, 52 years old, I want to understand how I'm doing relative to my peers, relative to my buddies. It's that context that starts to give me, great, give me a fitness number, but if I don't have context as to how that relates to either my peer groups or some category that just gives me contextually sort of how this data is relevant, it loses its power right away. So we think a lot about context, we think a lot about insights, and then just relevance. Going back to what you and I joked about earlier, it's like, it's important to keep it simple. Sorry, last one I always pull out there, like, if it's not fun and entertaining, which I said earlier, it also loses its, we can look at data all day long, but there's got to be something in there that hopefully delights you in some way. Even if it's a tough number, looking at my numbers right now, they would not look good. But it's still the entertainment value. It's, I saw the kudos started coming in just for the simple fact that it was the first time I'd uploaded in a month and people realized that I was back. So finding that relevance and trying to surprise people in a positive way, that goes a long ways.
I'm going to go, you talk about the fun and the delight that you are hopefully bringing and enabling and fostering in an experience. But, and I think we know, we know what social media and kudos and feedback can do and likes can do. What's the, I guess the ethos or the psychology and I guess the corporate ethics behind, at some point though, like, when do you feel like, and it's a personal responsibility as well, but I guess there's definitely moments when you care too much about Strava, right? You care too much about the perception of you on Strava, and I have to run 7-minute pace or else I'm not going to get as many likes. You know what I mean? Like, I guess, do you feel, and this is tough from a corporate responsibility perspective, I guess is what I'm getting at. What is that role for social media companies in 2020 to be the arbiter of, like, are we hurting or helping at this point? And how do you guys, how do you manage that, and how do you navigate those kind of tough, more emotional questions at Strava?
Yeah, it's a great one. So a couple things come to mind. We really feel like Strava is a place where you can be your raw self. Like that's the first thing. We have a set of core values at Strava. Everybody company has them. Trust me, we live them. They're called the Strava ABCs. We actually put them on a coin. We like to joke inside Strava, there's no sacred cows. We're prepared to change anything if it makes sense, except for the ABCs, A, B, and 3 Cs: authenticity, balance, and then it's craftsmanship, it's camaraderie, and it's commitment. Those are our A, B, and C's. Authenticity is what's so important here for this conversation, right? We want to be authentic. We want you to show up as your authentic self on Strava in your athletic life. We're not trying to allow you to put your whole life here. We don't need to know about your birthday. We don't need to know what your kids had for breakfast. We don't want to hear about your political views and so forth. This is about your athletic life and how you're sharing it. But you should be able to show up in whatever state you're in, right? Again, like myself, I've had to get very comfortable. Like today, I think I posted, my minute miles were 9 minutes, 20 seconds. Out running 3 miles for the first time in a month. And I gotta just turn the legs over. So it starts with authenticity. Second thing is we've had to watch our athlete behavior. So I'll give you a funny story going back now a number of years ago. We didn't used to have photos inside Strava. You could simply upload your GPS and we'd show you the map and so forth. And we realized that not only are photos a great way to kind of capture part of the story that's going on every time you work out, but we also found that it's a great way to convince people you don't always have to go out and chase your next PR or your next CR or your next KOM on Strava. Because we saw some of that behavior. We saw people like intentionally not uploading unless they had just done something exceptional. And like, that's crazy. It's like, why don't you post? But post because you just ran through the mud or because you saw an amazing sunrise. Those are just as important. So that's a second thing. That's one just example, and that's worked really well. I think we've begun to see people adopt sort of photos and take a time. And then the third piece that we've come to appreciate is the more choice we can give into what you want to share. So we're working on ways you don't want your pace to show up, no problem. Let's make it easy for you to take that piece out. Or for years, for the professional athletes, they wanted to hide certain things about their workouts. Maybe it's their power output or their wattage and so forth. No problem. We just simply made it something that they could hide. So we're looking for ways to create greater flex in how you show up on Strava so that you get the benefits without some of those pressures I think you just talked about.
That's really interesting. And I think I'd love to, kind of stay on this almost business ethics plane and bring it back to data. And I think it's, one thing that you guys are doing that I'd love to share with our audience a little bit more is around Strava Metro. And I think, I can kind of point our audience back to a conversation we had with Mayor Jacob Fry a few months ago. Jacob Fry is was a former professional runner who joined our pod, and now he's the mayor of Minneapolis. And we actually discussed, what is the future of cities and urban planning. And, I guess I'd love to understand, because it feels like, from a high level, Strava Metro is trying to enable city planners to have a different perspective on how they approach overall transportation and a relationship with roads. So I'd love to give you an opportunity to share, from your team's kind of, I guess, corporate perspective of what we do with data. How are you sharing that and I guess giving it back to the world?
Yeah. This gets fun. You're right. I can get on my soapbox here and talk about the power of our community. I mean, this is what gets so exciting. It's not only sort of what we can do for each of our athletes, but when you bring a global community of athletes together, it's really amazing what you start to unlock. And so what you're describing is Strava Metro. This is a service that was launched, now I guess it's been 4 or 5 years ago. It was actually inbound. So the quick history on Metro. So Metro is a data service that allows city planners, local governments, to basically look in detail at the way in which athletes are moving through their cities. It's all aggregated, it's all anonymized, it's not like individual data is there, but they're able to look at the aggregate to really understand certain patterns of movement, depending on time of day, depending on season. Is it rush hour or is it a Saturday afternoon? They really begin to get a very good sense of the way in which people move, which then allows them to do exactly what you said, which is to really get into better urban planning, rethink their infrastructure, whether it's bicycle and pedestrian pathways. And as they make changes, they can do sort of cause and effect. They can look at before and after and really use the Strava information. came to us inbound through the state of Oregon years ago. It was a Strava member who happened to be part of urban planning, who kind of had this idea on a bike ride. I'll bet that Strava has some insights. Can we talk to them? And if you fast forward to today, this is a service actually just last month that we officially launched as a free service out to qualified partners around the world. I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of, well, it's been explosive in recent weeks, but I'll use a number today. I know we have at least 400 partners worldwide now using this. Everyone from Paris to the city of London to the state of Oregon, parts of Australia, and they're really using this information to make better informed decisions around, frankly, how to make these urban areas that are fairly dense safer and better for our cyclists and for our runners.
I think it's interesting that you said that. I mean, it's essentially you apply, and you're supporting and giving out this data. And I think I'd love to dive into this, like the perception of like sharing open source data with community. And I think it's such a powerful tool, because now I'm starting to think back to, you mentioned the number one customer is like that user experience, and you don't see ads on Strava, right? And like, you obviously could use the data you have to you could monetize that easily with ads, but instead you are giving it into this kind of, like, I'm saying open source, but I'm saying like you're enabling and handing it off to hopefully somebody who can do something even greater with this data. And I'd love to know, like, you're in San Francisco, you're part of this tech bubble, like, and I'd love to just, like, the ethics around open sourcing a mass file of data in the hopes of like bettering society with the data. Like, what an opportunity. And I'd love to know, like, I guess, how do we share this sort of reaction and this instinct to other tech platforms, and I guess, and social media platforms and data gathering platforms in general, to share it and hopefully do better for society with it.
Yeah. So let me give some history here. So full transparency, when Metro was launched, there was thought around sort of how to make this a business. And initially we charged cities and local governments and so forth for access to information, in part because it was expensive for us to produce, and in part because we were trying to figure out, is this a reasonable way in which we, diversify our monetization and, all these buzzwords that people like to use. But basically, is this a way in which we're going to help grow our business? And going back to when, Michael and I stepped back into the business and said, let's go back to some basics here. What serves us really well when we have the singular focus on the athlete experience, and our subscription business is how we're going to build this model out. It actually sort of gave us the freedom to then look at other things we were doing inside the company and put a different prioritization lens on them. And so in something like Metro, it was clear it was of high value to our partners, to these cities that were using it. But instead of worrying about how much money we charge them or what that sort of the revenue relationship should be, think about impact. And that's what got us excited. Was this shouldn't be in the hands of just a few cities who can afford to pay us. This should be in the hands of as many cities as possible, because in many ways it's serving Strava. If we can make these environments safer and better for our runners and our cyclists and people who love to be active outdoors, well, then let's do that. Let's improve those infrastructure, which allows more people to be active, which by definition should allow more people to count on Strava, and it becomes a self-fulfilling circle. So for us, it was an easy decision. Let's turn this around. Let's think about impact. And Alex, I could give you story after story. It's fascinating to see how people think about, I mean, who would imagine? I'll give you one example. There was I believe it was a university just a few years ago that partnered with us, took a look at the way in which Strava athletes were moving through national parks. Again, all aggregated, anonymized data, just trying to understand movement patterns for the people who are in it. And in doing so, they were able to extrapolate what would happen if there was a wildfire in that area. They were trying to understand the rate at which they could move firefighters in and how those firefighters could move more effectively to get to the spots that they needed to in order to stop it. So, it's a highly relevant topic for anybody who lives in the Western United States these days. Like, this has become a huge problem. And who would have thought that athletes just having fun in national parks could become part of the solution, right? Just a great example. We just did another research study with Stanford University looking at the effects of the pandemic and COVID on elite athletes and training. And so we got a body of our professional athletes on Strava to contribute to this and really look at it. And the data, the research is just coming out. It's fascinating to really understand that. Never before possible had we not brought this community together in one place. And then again, I think to your point, being very clear and transparent around how we can deliver on impact in here and how we as a community can begin to support sort of solutions to, some of the world's toughest problems.
I mean, I think, and you can use your imagination as to take it to scale, right? Like the insights that you are getting, and to share that with the people who it can maybe again like enable those insights to make change is amazing. And I think you might need it's just like you almost just needed a platform to put the data, right? And it seems like Strava has kind of become that platform where it's like, okay, we're comfortable putting it here. And luckily, the arbiters and the people who have the keys to that data, which is your team, is willing to share that in a healthy way, and not just to sell it to a bunch of ad agency poachers like me.
It's funny. You're exactly right. I think we have to be very careful where that line is and be clear and disciplined on it. We had an interesting when we decided to take Metro and allow it to be free out there again to these qualified partners. There was a little bit of angst. It's like, will ARC be okay with us thinking about this free when, frankly, we put a lot of emphasis on this subscription? So we're asking our athletes, hey, there's just for everybody who's out there, it's like there's a free version of Strava you can use. We just think that the whole Strava is much better. But here we were sort of offering up this free thing that we used to charge for. And again, the community reaction was awesome because what the community came back and said was, this is just another great reason to subscribe. I mean, if what I'm doing is now contribute, I'm having fun. I'm just uploading my runs and my rides and my, whatever, my walks with my family on the weekends. And that by definition is helping make my community better. What another great way. So it was almost the opposite reaction that we had anticipated might be the case. And I think to your point, once you're clear and disciplined about what you're doing, you can really rally a group around, again, whether it's a cause, whether it's an opportunity. So message out to other tech companies and other companies with the data. It's like, look, clear and discipline leads to some really great things.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. And I think, people can see even more value in, because people at this point are comfortable with subscriptions, especially if it's contributing to things that align with their core interests and their core values. And I think telling that story for you guys will obviously be critical to like, hey, like this is what we are doing with your data, and this is why ads don't live on Strava. And I think it was almost double down even more why people are at peace, hopefully, with being on the subscription side of things, because I've seen the blowback from that on our side as well. So our hour is almost up, but I would love to. I have a couple, last couple questions. I want to take it maybe a little outside of the Strava day-to-day page, but just in general, I would love to get your take on what are some of the innovations or maybe approaches to tech in general that are exciting you on a day-to-day basis or inspiring your team on a day-to-day basis. Has there been an innovation? Has there been a product launch? Has there been an ad campaign that struck you as unusual or innovative in a way you haven't seen lately?
Ooh, tough one. I think, not to sit here and try to make lemonade out of lemons with this pandemic itself, right? But there really is an element of just the first innovation I'd say is just like this awakening around the importance of fitness and wellness and how that's reshaping entire industries, right? We can look at, on the downside, I feel for any of these gym owners and health club owners, because I believe that their mission was really good, right? Providing a place where people could work out. And they can't do it now. But what's happened? What's been filled? That void has been filled with some really fascinating technologies. Again, whether it's a Peloton or it's a Zwift or it's a Hydro, or the mirrors and the tonals and so forth. This is really fascinating stuff to sort of think about now, bringing it right back into the home and allowing people to feel connected in the moment. So we're excited by the innovation that's happening in what we call workouts, because a workout, anything that brings some creativity and innovation to a workout, it's just one more way to keep somebody motivated. And why is that interesting for Strava? Because we're the connective tissue. Any of those workouts bring into Strava to allow you to then have your whole athletic life in one place, right? Sort of that seamless integration of those. So really exciting to see the way in which the industry has responded to some difficult times there. And then I think the other one is one you talked earlier, just the evolution of these devices and what's captured, and how to think about the relevance. I happen to be a new convert to the Aura Ring. I don't wear it 24/7. I wear it when I sleep. But I got to admit, I'm kind of addicted now. Like I wake up in the morning. It's one of the first things that I make sure it's uploaded to my phone. And whether it's Aura or it's Whoop, another great product that integrates with Strava today, I'm already, my wheels are turning in terms of how do we want to think about sleep as it relates to a Strava activity and to my Strava profile. And should sleep be another activity? That doesn't seem quite right yet. No, but sleep belongs in Strava. Like it's got a role. These are the kinds of things that are really fun inside Strava that we're trying to understand. We know there's high relevance to the athletic life. How do we keep it fun and entertaining? And how do we contextually bring it into Strava in a way that makes sense? Those would be two examples where we're really excited about what's happening.
My final question is, if you run, let's say like it's essentially like a coffee shop meetup, or maybe you bump into somebody at the trailhead, and you're just rehashing a run or a run you're about to go on, and you mentioned that you were Mark from Strava. What is the first piece of frustrated feedback that somebody gives to you on a day-to-day basis, and how do you respond to them? What is the number one gripe that people immediately bring up to you that you are forced to confront on a daily basis?
Alex, I should have started out this conversation by asking you. The short answer is there is no loss for the complaints that are out there. We call it the noise of opportunity. Everybody has got a great idea, and I mean this sincerely. It's very rare where I don't hear a complaint where I'm not like, yeah, you're right, that makes total sense, or yeah, we've got to fix that. I think it's typically, if I were to pick a few, and we're making progress here. People are really excited about the way in which Strava can kind of upgrade their pre-workout experience. What I mean by that is, how can we help them continue to discover really fun things that they can go do, right? We've launched this Routes on Mobile, if you're familiar with it, where you can kind of go pick and, hey, I'm looking for a 5-mile run somewhere in my neighborhood, or I just traveled somewhere. Hopefully we'll all be able to travel again. I'm traveling to a new city and I want to be able to run. So there's a lot of emphasis. I tend to get a lot of feedback around, when are you guys going to show me that? When are you going to do that? I think that's one. And then the other one, we're really working hard to make sure we're bringing integrity to our leaderboards, to ensuring that somebody, the classic thing that happens, somebody has a great run, they finish their activity, and they hop in their car to drive home, but they forget to turn off their Garmin, right? And now you've got that in. The tools are all there, but people don't necessarily go and fix it and crop it and so forth. And so that one thing is now in the leaderboard. Is now there's a runner who's just done a 2-minute mile, and that's the worst. Nobody wants to see that. So lots of technology going into that, how we can improve that. Lots of user-facing features or athlete-facing that we can just make it easier for people to improve or fix their activities. But those would be two examples. Yeah.
I'm sure the feedback is like, hey, unless Kipchoge's done it, then like Kipchoge should be the arbiter of truth, right? Unless he has done it, whatever, like if you exceed Kipchoge limits, then you're automatically flagged and it's taken down.
It's flagged. That's right. That's
I
right.
I mean, I'm sure. I mean, like people could that feels like. I mean, humbly, that feels like a relatively programmable feature. I mean, is
You
there an
know,
automatic
it's
flag system?
there is, and it's getting better every day. But you'd be amazed at how many false positives we have. Like this, it happens particularly. So we have a lot of, particularly on the cycling side, we've got a huge percentage of the pros now on Strava. I mean, I think it was well over 2/3 of this year's Tour de France riders were uploading every stage. So you'd be amazed, even though you say that and you try to set it, you'd be amazed at how many of their rides get flagged by athletes saying, "No way." No way did he just climb Mount Ventoux at this pace. And we have to go back and explain, no, actually, that was legit. That's how fast they are today. So you're right. If I wouldn't surprise me if Kipchoge gets flagged on Strava half the time. It's that kind of thing. So we're getting better. The team we got a sharp team that's thinking through this. And though I'll bring up kind of like we were talking earlier about technology can't be out in the forefront. It also can't be the solution, the single solution here. AI is not going to be the sole reason. We have to figure out a way to work with our community. A lot of what we're trying to figure out is how do we allow curation to happen in local communities? We oftentimes, we can't tell when a stretch of road is safe or not, or what is a legitimate performance on something. Maybe it is legit because they were going downhill, right? And they were running downhill. So being able to give the tools to our community to allow them to curate a really sort of high integrity, realistic, enjoyable experience, that's part of this that we have to figure out, how to balance that technology, but also community involvement that ends up in the sweet spot, if that makes sense.
I think, yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, at the end of the day, like I think self-policing, right, and like investment in your own experience, like I mean, that's as powerful of tool as anything is the power of the community reaching out and policing. And I suppose you can take that sort of perspective and investment towards society in general. Self-policing and kind of community investment overall. And then you mentioned
right.
the pre-experience with Strava. The amount of people that I've chatted with that are like, you know what? I wish Airbnb and Strava could connect to give me the best trail route towards the best trailhead. I think I hear that every day. And then the other thing that the other thing I hear is flybys, and like that not being as a typical tool on the daily experience. But I'm sure, unfortunately, just like self-policing, you're also at the whim of the worst of humanity, which unfortunately, I'm just going to guess, like flybys are subject to people probably feeling unsafe and being stalked because unfortunately Strava is still at the end of the day you're subject to I guess the worst of human behaviors.
Yeah, Alex, Flybus is a good example. I don't know if you saw recently, we made a functional change to the feature where because privacy and safety is paramount inside Strava, we talked about it earlier, it's a high priority, excuse me. We didn't get rid of the feature by any stretch of the imagination, but we made it default off. And so you have to actively select to be part of Flybys. And we know that a lot of people are disappointed by that. And we really feel the most important thing we can do is provide that optionality to our athletes and allow them to select in and under the right conditions. And so ultimately it's going to be a great feature, but we need time to sort of think through how to do it the right way.
Absolutely. Well, I want to end this on a positive note, which I think you teased out a little bit, which I think is the amazing the acceptance of elites to put things on Strava. I think is amazing. You're mentioning all the sheer mass amount of Tour de France riders putting their rides on Strava. Like I guess how did we get to this point? This kind of tipping point of now it was like elites were considering putting their workouts and performances on Strava, but we hit this tipping point. Maybe it was COVID. I don't know what it was, but we've clearly hit the tipping point. Now all these elites are on Strava. And like, I guess, what is your hope for this, for, I guess, this new behavior from the elite community?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. You go back historically. So we've never paid athletes, pro athletes, to be on Strava. It's just not part of our DNA. But there was a thesis that said, look, it's really important that we build a product or a service that can meet the needs of the most demanding athletes in the world. And it's kind of just following in the blueprint of so many of the other great sort of sports companies of, even the last, it's if you can't serve their needs, that we're all inspired by their performance and so forth. So that's always there. We wanted to make sure that something would resonate. And the pros have actually been there for many years. I think what we're seeing, particularly with COVID, is they lost a lot of their venue where they could compete. So we saw them begin to surface in different ways. All of a sudden, sort of elite runners and so forth popping up and doing some amazing things like backyard and so forth. And I think also your tipping point, I think that there was, I mentioned earlier, like the ability for us pro cyclists to hide their power and so forth. I think there was sort of this concern of the risk reward. And I think what they've come to appreciate, for many of those elite cyclists that were in the tour, they don't have a chance to win the stage, but they're getting back to their bus and they're pulling up Strava and they're all sitting there trash talking each other in terms of, who did get the KOM on that toughest segment for the day. And so we've just become part of that vernacular and serving their needs, but they're behaving on Strava the exact same way that every other community member is. And I think that to us is what's so much fun, is that it's universal in terms of sort of the enjoyment that they get.
Well, Mark, I think that's a good place to end, and again, it hones in on the fun and the delight that hopefully Strava is giving the community. And I know you've given a lot of our community some fun and delight, and I appreciate the digital community that you've been able to foster. Is something that we at Flow always tried to serve and foster. So we appreciate that, and we're looking forward to the ways that Strava enables our sport moving forward.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure. Love to do it again.
Well, a lot to pull apart from that conversation, and I am very, very grateful for Mark and the Strava team's time. I know we could pick apart a few topics in there forever, but I think one of the things that motivated me the most, or I guess interested me the most, is that kind of ethical conversation about what we're doing with data. And I think that Strava Metro insight is so interesting that they are taking this giant treasure trove of data and they're enabling, hopefully enabling the right people with this data to do some interesting things in society. And I think we should all get behind this and really invest and have agency over where our data is going, and hopefully it's bettering society and humanity. So I know that's a little philosophical for us, but I think it's important for us to talk about, because this data kind of exchange platform is again, it's kind of taking place right before our eyes, and the vessel is running and cycling, and I think that's really interesting. So we have a voice in this conversation of again, how companies are using our data moving forward. The other thing I kind of wanted to go back and toss it to the community a little bit here is I want to hear from you guys how we can better use data executionally in a broadcast. I heard lots of love for the NBC broadcast of the Tour de France and things like that. And you're totally right. It was great. But again, I think we need to remember that data and technology should be elevating the process. It shouldn't be the focus, right? So how do we balance that, right? What are the insights you would like to hear if I'm calling, the final at Olympic trials this spring? What are the insights you guys want to hear? What's possible? So let's make this again, an open source discussion about how we best use these data and these wearable devices to elevate the experience of track and field. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys. We'll see you next time beneath the grandstand.